Hi, and welcome to this video and lecture on lab safety in the secondary science classroom. A couple things I want to talk about first of all is it is the teacher's legal and moral responsibility, whether doing science activities or any other activities, to have safety guidelines. Active science should not be avoided because of safety issues, but rather it should be undertaken with the knowledge of those safety issues and therefore following what a reasonable and prudent person would do. Oftentimes in the lab, I've had conversations with students about being respectful, being responsible, and being safe, and using those three categories when dealing with any classroom management issues associated with the lab or the regular classroom experience. Tort laws. When we look at this, we're talking about safety in science settings as a moral, professional, and increasingly legal responsibility for all science educators. Tort laws are based on the premise that when someone does something to harm another person physically, mentally, or financially, the person harmed ought to be compensated for the loss. Tort lawsuits are governed by a set of rules that are different from the rules that govern criminal lawsuits. In other words, it's important for you to take whatever precautions you can to keep your students from being physically, mentally, financially harmed in your classroom or when under your care. Negligence has been defined as conduct that falls below the standard established by law or profession to protect others from harm. It is sometimes described as failure to exercise due care. One of the things that's very important is during a lab activity, you'll want to make sure that you and or somebody else within your school setting remains in the classroom. Do not leave the classroom in order to take care of business of some sort when you are having students complete a lab. Reasonable and prudent judgment means that you would anticipate reasonable hazards, you would eliminate them, or you'd be confidently prepared to address them. It also means that you take due care, which is summarized in 3 teacher duties: your instruction, your supervision, and your maintenance. And when you think of a teacher as in loco parentis, it means that you would do whatever you can to keep the students safe. Liability. So we'll talk a little bit more about negligence here, is conduct that falls below a standard of care established by law or profession, remember. No applicable regulations and recommendations regarding your lab that you're conducting. Instruct students on safe procedures and warn them on various things. Supervise their conduct and provide a safe learning environment for them to complete the lab. Classroom safety. Some things to consider. Let's make sure that it's not overcrowded. Make sure there's no blind spot in the lab so that you can observe and see everybody in the lab. Make sure there are safety concerns that are addressed and that you've had students, you've informed students on those safety concerns, and make sure that you have had students complete a safety contract. Always go back to what it says in that safety contract when doing a lab and have reminders for students. If there is an incident that happens, make sure that you complete an accident or incident report that your school requires of you. Make sure you have lockable storage cabinets so students can't get to the materials and do things inappropriately when you're not there. Make sure that electrical outlets are properly grounded, so you want to inspect those within your classroom regularly. Make sure doors open toward the outside when possible. Make sure aisles are sufficiently wide enough. Students make sure they clean up their areas. If they have to stack some stuff onto chairs or desks, have them do that so that the aisles are accessible and can be walked through. Make sure emergency numbers are posted, and make sure your classroom is as neat and orderly as possible. Some other things to be thinking of. Make sure that you know the safety rules and the hazards that are associated with the experiments you're doing. If you're dealing with chemicals, make sure you understand those chemicals and the safety rules associated with them. Make sure that students are not doing any unauthorized experiments. Make sure that the lab area is always cleaned before leaving. Make sure that students wash their hands, especially if they've been using chemicals. Make sure that hair is tied back. Shoes are closed-toed shoes and not open-toed shoes, and make sure that students are wearing goggles when expected. Make sure that the warning signs of hazards are identified and shown to students. Storage areas are for teachers only. Remind students that it is off limits unless they are further directed, and the equipment is not the type of equipment that could cause chemical damage. Make sure students understand that there should be no food in the lab, and make sure that you are constantly supervising. Like I said before, do not leave the room. Check animal policies if you have animals involved in your experiment. Note that you never want to put anything in your mouth. Now, there are some exceptions to this. Sometimes during the year, you may do some fun lab experiments, like make peanut brittle or something like that. Teacher trained is make sure that you are trained in safety and, if possible, be trained in CPR. Make sure exits, fume hood showers, eye wash, and fire extinguishers are easily accessible. You as a teacher know where they are, and students in your classroom know where they are. Make sure chemicals are marked and in original containers and that the teacher disposes of the chemicals, and make sure that any spills are cleaned up appropriately. In summary, supervise students in lab investigations. Make sure that they understand that misbehavior is not tolerated. Make sure that you do not leave students unattended. Make sure you understand that what the emergency response would be, or what medical information you would need. Class size and lab space is appropriate for the size of your class. You may have to set up your class if you have an extremely large number of students. You may have to have half the class doing lab on one day and half the class doing the lab on another day. Instruct students in safe procedures. Make sure that they understand the safe operating procedures. Make sure they use the proper safety equipment. Make sure they understand the hazards for all the activities, and make sure this is all documented within your lesson and your lesson plan and or on the board, so that you can always go back to that in the event that you have a situation. Maintain a safe environment. So make sure safety checklists and logs are taken care of. Make sure that storage and disposal is done. Make sure there's no defective equipment out, or that it is taken care of when you find out that it is defective. And make sure tools have a process for distribution. Goggles. In the Minnesota State Statute, there is a section on eye protective devices. It's important that students understand that they are required to wear approved eye protective devices. Every person shall wear industrial quality eye protective devices when participating in, observing, or performing any function in connection with any courses or activities taking place in eye protection areas as defined in Subdivision 3 of any school, college, university, or other educational institution in the state. Penalty for failure to wear eye protective devices. Any student failing to comply with such requirements may be temporarily suspended from participation in said course, and the registration of a student for such course may be canceled or willful, flagrant, or repeated failure to observe the above requirements. So make sure that your students understand that this is not necessarily your requirement. It is the requirement of the state of Minnesota, and you just have to enforce that and make sure that they are conducting themselves in a safe way so that you can hopefully limit their risk of having eye damage take place. All right, I hope this gives you a good overview on lab safety in the science classroom. Thank you for watching.